Hey, good morning, Judge Shamus.
Good morning. How are you?
All right, how are you?
Good. Always good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks so much for being here for this morning.
My pleasure.
We'll give it a couple more minutes, and I'll make a couple of brief announcements and then hand it over to you.
Awesome.
Get started. It's 11:33, and the whole idea behind these monthly reports and updates is that we're going to be short and sweet and get everybody going again by 1:15. So I'm Vincent Atchity, CEO with Mental Health Colorado, formerly Executive Director of the Equitas Project. Disentangling mental health and criminal justice is a key area of concern and activity and interest for us. And we really appreciate all you allies and partners around the state of Colorado are doing and thinking about doing and planning on doing, and want to include everybody for an update at some point or another. We've got these booked out now through September, I think, but for other future updates, and we'll have a few minutes at the very end of this for short updates. And we can also include things in email follow-ups if you have things you would like to share with everybody in the group. A few other things to mention. We have been keeping notes and recording these meetings, and those are all available on the mentalhealthcolorado.org website. We can make sure you have a link to that in a follow-up email as well. A couple of things we've got coming up. We haven't set a date yet, but aiming in the mid-fall to be partnering with some others on hosting a summit on prosecutor-led diversion. And so we'll be seeking prosecutors from around the state who are doing diversion work or interested in doing diversion work to participate in that. But there will also be prosecutors from other states around the country involved. May is Mental Health Month. I can't neglect to mention we were able to celebrate the Proclamation Day on May 3rd with Lieutenant Governor Primavera reading the proclamation. So thank you for being the ones who are mindful of mental health all year round. We've got a number of other mental health months available on our website. Next Tuesday, we have an international yoga star, Marisha Doe, guiding a 30-minute virtual introduction to yoga for mental health. All right, no more from me. With that, I'm going to introduce our presenter for the day, Judge Jonathan Shamus from Lake County. After Judge Jonathan speaks, there'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion and very brief updates from others. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and introduce Judge Shamus. Thank you, Judge, for being with us. There he is. He was with us. He is with us. He's coming back. Thank you. It's all yours. You're muted.
Sorry about that. They totally disconnected me, then I crashed and so I came to a different computer. Anyway, thanks everyone for being here. Last year, the state judicial branch did a survey of all judges as to what it is they thought they needed to know. One of the top three things they felt they needed to know, in addition to the law, how to conduct a jury trial, was understanding mental health. And I thought that really recognized a huge gap from the bench, because at least among the trial judges every day, we encounter people with various challenges, whether it's a chronic mental illness, TBI, whatever it is. And in law school, there is no training on mental health 101. At best, you might get a class in mental health law, which is generally about competency issues or possibly M1s and things like that. And most people don't take that class in law school. And so we're asked to be making decisions from the bench that affect people's lives with absolutely no understanding of what we're doing. I would say a good number of judges probably, if they think something's wrong, don't know what it is. They might ask for a mental health evaluation. And if and when they get that mental health evaluation, they'll just flip through to the recommendation page and just simply follow the recommendations, whatever they are, without really understanding how those recommendations came to be, what impact they might have, what alternatives there might be. And to me, that's a huge gap as to whether or not we really can perform our job as judges competently, impacting people's lives effectively without having the foundation to really know how to engage with a significant population of the people who come before us. So several years ago in Colorado, we brought in a program from this Judges and Psychiatrists Leadership Initiative. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Steve Leifman. He's a judge out of Miami. And we put on a program here to introduce the importance of mental health to area judges. That program attracted probably about 30 people. It was a day-long program, and most of the participants thought it was incredibly valuable. And most of the people walked away saying, okay, now we know this is important. What is it that we need to know? Then the following year at Judicial Conference, we did a program basically to amplify that message. That time, over 100 judges in Colorado showed up, and we developed a concept as to how to approach educating judges on mental health and what our roles are in tackling what, from my perspective, has been a generational long default where the judges, the courts, jails are all expected to address mental health issues, mostly through the deinstitutionalization of people with mental health issues, which was a good thing. But because the default then is it all comes back to the courts, and it really wasn't funded or structured in a way to be effective, we were left with this huge problem that we had neither the resources nor the competence to be able to address. Out of that project, there was also a national effort, and I put 3 links in the chat. One was an IRS link, which was a mistake, sorry about that. The other 2 were 2 reports from the National Center from State Courts, one dealing with judicial education, and the other one dealing with just trying to decriminalize mental health. In any case, one of the things that came out of that process of amplifying the importance of trying to figure out what is it that judges need to know about mental health. The Supreme Court then created a subcommittee of the Judicial Education Committee of the Supreme Court, specifically dedicated to a curriculum on mental health. That happened probably about 4 or 5 months pre-COVID. And so it's been kind of a slow ramp up to try to sort out what that's going to look like. What we have developed, though, is a 4-pronged effort to try to create a repository of information to teach judges what do you need to know about different diagnoses, how is trauma different than defiance? How is bipolar disorder different from depression? And how might it affect how you perform on the bench, and how to engage with the people on the bench? So the first quadrant of information is really just, what does the judge need to know about clinical information, about diagnoses, about treatment? What's the difference between CBT and DBT? What's the difference between using ACT therapy as an intervention? What functional information would be helpful? The second quadrant of information has to do with, what skills does the judge have to have? I think the default when you're being challenged on the bench dealing with any party is to talk loud and slowly. And that's probably not an effective way of engaging someone who is in crisis, or someone who's simply challenged for a whole variety of mental health issues. And so to help educate the judge as to, okay, just take your time, speak quietly, ask for reflective listening. In some instances, just try to be especially validating. These tools of motivational interviewing might be effective interventions to be able to engage with that individual effectively. And so to try to develop a series of workshops where we can develop the skills to be effective in engaging with the population that, as I said, we don't really have any expertise or knowledge as to how to be effective in engaging, can be very, very effective. The third area, which is something which is also being embraced nationally, is looking at the courts as, and the judges specifically, as being a leader for change in dealing with mental health issues, in doing things such as convening SIMS mapping, a sequential intercept model mapping, which, if you're familiar with, it sort of addresses various intercepts of how people might engage with the system and how you can improve deliveries and contacts across the spectrum of everything from before you ever even have any contact with the authorities to if you're in custody and engaging with re-entry into the community, what that might look like. And a delegation from Colorado attended an event in Idaho, which was convened by the Conference of Chief Justices. It was a collaboration of all the Chief Justices from every state across the country to focus on what the courts need to do to improve the quality of mental health in this country, and also how the justice system deals with it. The Colorado delegation came up with a recommendation that every jurisdiction in Colorado should participate in the SIMS mapping process to assess where the weaknesses and gaps are within the system, and then try to figure out solutions for doing that. And that would be done through the leadership of the judges in each judicial district. And so that was a commitment that was made. It's kind of stumbled a little bit along the way, but I believe creates a huge opportunity for trying to build that collaborative model between the courts and everyone else. And so the third quadrant is to help facilitate that process of giving the judges the knowledge, the skills, the attention to be able to help participate in that process. Up here in Lake County, we did that in December, where I think one of the first rural districts to go through that process. Vincent, you may know of others, and so maybe we're not so special. But in any case, to me, the opportunities of both using and leveraging the powers of the court to improve the system is really, really important. Also, to have a better understanding as to how the lens through which the courts look at the whole system. Generally, if I have a case where there's a mental health issue, the default process is, well, if I think there's a problem, if it's a criminal case, I'll say get a mental health evaluation, follow the recommendations, I'm done. If we could figure out a way to better integrate what our role is and how we engage with people to influence better outcomes, there's an enormous possibility. The last area, and I'll get to something about that in a second, is to a specific project that we're working on that I think can really demonstrate how that transformation can really improve mental health deliveries in Colorado. The last area is really just how to deal with the mechanics of, if you have a competency case, what is the best process of doing that? If you have a case where you need a conservatorship or a guardian, what are the mechanics of doing that? If you have an insanity case, how do you deal with that? So it's dealing more with the legal mechanics of what a judge needs to know how to do. That's important in improving how to make sure things get done properly. It's amazing how even in just competency cases, getting the right order signed, get it to Pueblo, getting an outpatient evaluation can be so incredibly challenging. If there's a case where there's a finding of incompetence and there's an order for outpatient restoration, I would say the vast majority of judges in Colorado may not be as familiar as they need to be with what is the time frame as to when to get a plan in place and have that reported to the court as to what that restoration is going to look like, how it's going to be done, and how often does it need to be reviewed by the court. And so those mechanics are really helpful. So that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish right now. Functionally, what that's going to look like in the next 12 months is a series of webinars for judges monthly on different areas of import in dealing with mental health issues. One of the, and yeah, AOT is definitely one of the topics that we want to cover. One of the things we want to be sensitive to, and this is where a group like yours might be helpful, is it's easy for us to get access to clinical information. It's easy for us to get access to the mechanics of how to do things. One of the things that to me, though, is so important and so potentially potent is to help give judges some lived experience as to if someone is engaged in the legal system, what is that experience? What does that look like? Where is it that we fall short because we're doing something that simply doesn't understand or appreciate if we're requiring someone to take meds they don't want to take? And we get into a power struggle as to, well, we're going to demand you're going to do that. And if you don't do this, we're going to throw you in jail. If it's the dynamic, and I think that tends to be the default dynamic of the court, is we create orders, we have an expectation those orders are going to be followed. And if they're not followed, then the response is, well, what do we have to do about it? We can send you to jail. And that might not be the first response, but that may be a totally inappropriate dynamic or approach to dealing with someone who's in crisis or simply trying to embrace the little bit of control they have in their existence. And for the judges to understand what that looks like, what that means, and what might be more effective. If someone is completely and totally non-compliant with probation, but that's because they're depressed and they can't get out of bed, the great response is let's throw them in jail. That'll address them. That'll make them less depressed. That'll more. We just don't have a really effective way of understanding what the cause of an effect is. If someone is not responding to questions that are being given to them in court, if it's because they have been a victim of an offense or have some history of trauma, and we're not effectively understanding that, and we get into this, you need to do what we're asking you interaction, we're not going to be effective. We're going to go cause harm to that individual, and that's completely contrary to what our objectives are. So that's kind of what we're trying to sensitize, educate the courts, the judges specifically, to be more effective in. And I think if they have that knowledge base, if they have that skill set, chances are they'll be more sensitive, more effective, more responsive to the needs of people who have mental health issues in the court system. One of the things, though, as I said, is that the default is because we don't have immediate access or understanding of what's even out there. We'll just order somebody to go and figure it out and to get connected to those resources. Reality is, for many people, whether or not they have a mental health issue, the fact that they even make it to the courthouse is a miracle. If we then hope that they'll make a connection to whatever services they need, that might be a daunting task as well. And so one of the things that the Behavioral Health Task Force that the governor put together had recommended was trying to develop some community justice models to improve deliveries in mental health. Out of that, the Access to Justice Commission of the Supreme Court came up with recommendations to require every judicial district to try to assess how to implement a project which creates what I guess we're currently calling a court concierge, someone who's based in the courthouse who can connect people to services. And so whether or not they're court involved or not, right now we have Bridges Liaisons, which is an amazing resource that if someone has a court case, the court can appoint this liaison to assist that individual get connected to whatever services they need. So if it's mental health services, if it's housing services, if it's TANF, whatever it is that they need, that individual might be able to help them get those connections. So they're more likely to be successful and stable. Problem with that is, one, the caseloads are overwhelming. And so it's becoming increasingly difficult, especially in the rural areas of Colorado, that Bridges Liaison is covering a vast amount of territory. And so there may be little personal interaction between the liaison and the client. And so all of those things create impediments to the success of trying to connect that individual services. So we came up with the idea of housing someone in the courthouse who can provide that service. And so that can look a multitude of different ways. It could be a person who's physically a staff person in the courthouse to connect that individual. They just need to show up. If they're in crisis, we'll connect you with a co-responder. If they need just to get routine mental health services, they can make those connections. If they're homeless, they can connect that person to housing services. The better process that we're hoping some jurisdictions will do is also have the availability that that individual could connect through WebEx from the courthouse to possibly do initial intakes, initial assessments, might be able to even complete applications for things such as TANF and other things from the courthouse itself. One of the things that also can be included in this process is the possibility of, if, for example, the court has an eviction docket, to have someone from housing services physically in the courthouse so that there's not just the connection, but that person can actually be there to provide the service. And the thing that to me is really exciting about that possibility is, especially in rural jurisdictions like mine in Leadville, most people may not know where Sol Vista, our community mental health center, is located. They know where the courthouse is. They may not know where human services is located, but they know where the courthouse is. And so if the message to everyone is, come to court, we'll find a solution to your problem, that's probably a good thing for the courts, because I think most people look at the courts as, that's where I'm going to find my problem, or they're going to give me a problem as a solution. But that really shifts the dynamic as to what the court's role is and what our function is. More importantly, though, if it becomes a safe place where people can find those solutions, the likelihood of them finding those solutions is higher. The likelihood of, for example, if I accept a plea in a criminal case or have an issue in a divorce case or whatever kind of case it is, that I can simply say, we'll take the plea now, we'll pass the case, go down to the concierge, and then I can make as a part of the sentence, if they've had the initial assessments, I can be more precise on what the sentencing is. If that person has an actual appointment, I can say, make that appointment and not just hope all the stars line up and everyone gets connected and the right thing happens. Additionally, for jurisdictions like ours, which have no reentry services, if the sheriff or the jail can immediately send someone who's getting released to that concierge, the likelihood that they're going to have a softer landing from their release from custody is certainly improved as well. So that's one of the projects that we're working on in the court system. Another thing that we're trying to also develop is develop better co-responder protocols. As co-responders are being utilized more and more across the state, which is a wonderful thing, there really isn't any process or procedure to figure out, well, how is that person supposed to interact with the courts? And I see Teresa Haynes on from the Hope Center, who we're working with right now to figure out the models in our judicial district. And I think that's such an incredibly valuable and important process, because we don't get that information unless unless law enforcement decides it's information they want to share. We don't have it. And from the court's perspective, that interaction can have so much information. If it's a domestic violence case, is it a case where there even is probable cause? Maybe yes, maybe no. But if we have the information that there is a mental health component that might affect whether that probable cause exists, can affect whether the person gets arrested or not. If that person, by having that intervention, needs to be M1, and law enforcement doesn't do it, it's another mechanism where that can happen. Maybe it's not that severe. Maybe it's simply a matter of establishing bond conditions that have certain connections that are met. Again, if that co-responder has already captured that information, that could be invaluable to, instead of simply housing that person and releasing them or keeping them in custody if it's a DV case over an entire weekend, if that person's having either a minor or major mental health crisis, that can cause a great deal of harm to that individual. By sharing that information, that could totally make a difference. I know that we're shifting into having 48-hour advisements. That'll improve things a little bit. But if it's a case where the person's arrested even on a Thursday night and they should be advised immediately because they have to see the judge, but it's not in theirs or the community interest for that person to be held in custody, we have the ability to do that, but only if we have a mechanism for directing that information to the court. So that's another thing we've been talking about and working on. Another issue we're working on and trying to also develop, it's I guess at this point we're calling it advanced mental health directives with law enforcement. One of the things, of course, that happens in the system in Colorado is if someone has that police contact as a mental health issue, they may get an evaluation at the jail and deal with whoever's on call to address whatever the situation might be. Absolutely better than not addressing it at all. But one of the things that they've been doing in Arizona is that law enforcement has been able to develop a program to get access to what that individual's existing treatment protocols might be. And so if they're working with a clinician, and that clinician can be of assistance in helping that person stabilize or helping law enforcement know what the issues might be and how to effectively address them, isn't that an improvement to not knowing that information at all? And so we're trying to figure out whether we need to figure out how that Arizona system can be implemented in Colorado so that better information is conveyed, obviously protecting privacy and HIPAA and other issues too. But again, if we can connect people to services that are helpful, that work, that are trusted, the outcome is likely to be better. So those are the things that we're most immediately trying to address. Other things that I think are important that I invite your commitment to try to help push us forward and also the legislature forward to look at is how to use the courts to more effectively work with families of individuals who have mental health struggles. At this point, the courts tend to look at the individual who is the party before them as the only connection, as the only engagement. But family members can be enormously helpful in reducing the need for other services, but we do so little to support them and also to figure out how they can be used that generally, if they're there and show up, we hope that they can figure it out. But if we can provide supports for them to be helpful and effective, we can also improve outcomes. Another issue is trying, in the process of trying to decriminalize mental illness, there is talk about utilizing the civil process more than we have in the past. I know that Judge Leifman is trying to develop a model statute for civil commitment. Vincent, you probably know more about that than I do. I'm just waiting to get a copy of whatever it is that they create. I think that's really important. The one thing though that I'm hoping is all the focus tends to be on commitment and hospitalization. There's so many people that if you can figure out what is an appropriate role for the court where you don't need a civil commitment, but you just have someone who needs services, what might that look like? And if we can figure out that sweet spot between not over intervening, but providing support, my sense is you can probably prevent a lot of future criminal filings and more serious needs from that individual if we could figure out what that statute might look like. And then the last thing, which I think is really important, is to find a better check and balance. One of the things that Colorado has been doing so well in the last year is trying to improve deliveries of systems, trying to figure out how to better share what the best process and practices are. And so I've been working, for example, with OBH, and they have done a phenomenal job of developing better protocols and guidance for the courts, at least, as to how to deal with things such as hospitalizations and M1s and competency issues and also restoration issues. The problem is I'm sitting here participating in those committees, and I don't see as much change on a day-to-day basis. So for example, I had someone a few months ago who was found incompetent, but there was no place for her to go. So she stayed in jail for 90 days because she was not stable. One, that to me is inherently wrong. Two, that's incredibly expensive. And it caused her harm to be incarcerated that way. But we had a Bridges liaison, we had a forensic navigator in that case. We did everything right. It just seemed that something wasn't working. In my mind, it was that we didn't have the best resources available. But what do we need to do so as we move forward and develop better practices and better systems, that we're not just simply checking the boxes, but we're actually having a system that functions the way we're intending it to function. And so to the extent that you can keep us all honest, I just keep on pulling out my hair and shaking my head. I'd like to do better than that and actually make the difference and do right by the person who's before me. So to me, it's an enormous task that we have. It's kind of like trying to relocate Mount Everest and they only gave us a teaspoon to work with. But the way I look at it is, well, then use that teaspoon to have a tea party, get the people who have the heavy equipment and machinery who can actually do it together to kind of find out what those solutions. And I think you all are part of those people. So I know that there was a whole lot of stuff in the chat. So let me, I don't know if you want to just chime in and unmute and ask those questions, or whether I should go through the chat and try to address them. What works best, Vincent? I know I've kind of gone a little over.
Thank you so much, Judge Shamus. And yes, questions are very welcome, and you can put them in the chat, and I can start scrolling through that to see what there is, but you can also just unmute and ask. Please feel free.
And Vincent, I'll let you filter the questions then, if that's okay.
I'm really seeing more commentary than questions here in the chat, and people sharing information about other opportunities, that the Treatment Advocacy Center is hosting a webinar later today on sequential intercept mapping and the role of AOT. So that may be worthwhile. The Treatment Advocacy Center is the national leader in advocating for implementation of AOT. So that should be good. Somebody's added a link about AOT, inquired about how to identify the bridges, who the bridges liaisons are in your district. And that the best way to do that is just to connect with Jennifer Turner in the court administrator's office. She's the head of the program. There's a number and an email in the chat. We will share all of this on our website and out to you as well. And then some experiences shared. Question about the projected date for the publication of the civil commitment process document that has been underway, that Judge Shamus mentioned with Judge Leifman. Well, we are shooting for July so coming up soon, and we will see if we make that deadline. It is a complicated process to get all of the work group participants on the same page and then get feedback from some key informants elsewhere in the community so that we're doing our best to produce something that is going to stand up well. But that is, we're getting close. Judge Mack, one of the thought leaders behind the report from the National Center for State Courts Judicial Task Force, is a key member of our model legal processes work group as well. Well, so I don't see any other questions right now. Judge Shamus, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And do you have any final things you would like to say?
Just if anyone sees problems in the system with respect to how the courts or the justice system deals with our processes, procedures, there's a group of us that are really committed to affecting change that improves how things work. Please always feel free to reach out to me, and I can try to bring some attention to it.
And I know you asked for more input regarding lived experience of the system. We may be able to help put together some people to have a conversation with about that.
I think that's really effective. That's probably shifts the needle as much as anything else. We might intellectually know what to do or think we do, but until we see what that impact is, hear that, that's what really has the indelible impact on us. Because I think most of the bench genuinely wants to do the right thing. They just need the resources, tools, and perspective to be able to do it right.
Yeah, we've been, thinking a lot about the ecosystemic impact of when we use justice system rather than healthcare, and it's not just the affected individual, but their entire family and community that experience poorer outcomes from this approach that we've been taking.
And that's just antithetical to, I think, how this justice system has historically operated, except in family cases. And I think the more we can shift and see all the possible resources that are out there and how we can support and utilize them is really what can be a significant game changer.
All right, so we've got a few minutes. If anybody else in the group would like to share updates about your ongoing work, we've got an opportunity for that now.
My name is Brian Turner, and I work at Sol Vista Health. We cover one of the counties in Judge Shamus's judicial district, and 3 others. All of them are rural and frontier, mountain and into Fremont County. One of the things I would just throw out there, thinking with that example lingering in my mind of someone sitting in jail for months waiting to get placement and a level of care, rather than just being involved in the judicial system. I think that there's a need for a deep collaboration among communities to figure out what are the better options, especially in rural parts of states. And I think the case can easily be made with one-time funding that is intended to be transformational coming down through the American Rescue Plan, to dedicate a sizable amount of that in what I see as essential infrastructure that is lacking in a lot of communities. So for us, as a mental health center, working with our communities to build a level of care that's not inpatient psychiatric beds, but is crisis respite, is a place where you can get short-term stabilization and get somebody on a path towards engagement and longer term recovery and supports. I feel like it's kind of disjointed right now in the organization around making sure that those are prioritized investments with this newly available funding that's going to be coming soon. I don't know how Mental Health Colorado has been participating in that conversation. I know it's really complex and it's even difficult to just understand what the dollars can be used for at this point. But I would think that's a really important piece and something to be highlighted is as a critical part of the intercept model. We need deep investment in facilities, and there's no real reliable funding streams for creating those things, at least not consistently across Colorado.
Thanks so much, Brian. Yeah, no, as we speak, we're working on a set of recommendations in a white paper or letter, and we'll be sure to include crisis respite. So thanks so much for mentioning that.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kelly Grebe, and I work with Centennial Peaks Hospital, and we do crisis stabilization. We do have a successful partnership with local law enforcement as a direct admission process. So law enforcement can bring people here instead of that person lingering in the ER when they do need crisis stabilization. One thing that I have found that has improved access and could be a really good partnership is virtual IOP programming, so intensive therapies that people could access virtually, and that could be relatively easy to implement in a jail system where they have access to a television, and we could do IOP therapy, serving people Medicaid, Medicare, TRICARE, with all of those things. I do have, if I could ask, since I have a judge's ear and I don't have that very often, I have a personal question around the other way the court system can be used when a mental health professional comes across someone with homicidal ideation. So I kind of believe that we could do a little more with the certification process when that comes up. If you guys get what I'm saying with that, I don't know if you do, but I personally have worked with people with homicidal ideation, and I think they need to be certified. So I'm just curious about that.
And I'm not quite sure if I fully understand your question, but to me, from a judicial perspective, if there is an active case for something, that creates the mechanism for us to hopefully be able to do something in that case. The barriers are not having that information or not having accurate information to know the severity of the problem. What I think happens often, though, is there is no active case. And so someone just comes to the court and says, here's this problem, this person has homicidal ideation. And then we're powerless to do something because there isn't a legal mechanism to order anything. And so to me, the challenge might be to figure out how to do that. And I mean, a civil protection order might be the mechanism to get that started. That might not solve the problem, but at least it would start by taking away weapons from that individual or possibly restricting that person's where he can or cannot go, which might reduce the risk. So to me, that's one of those things that the discussion to sort out what might work better is really, really important. I mean, one of the things that I'm super, super excited about, and it goes back to what I was saying about how we can have all the right programs, processes, protocols in place, but they're still not working. One of the things that Brian Turner and I have talked about is trying to set up some kind of case management system so that if there are cases that don't go the way we would hope they would, to troubleshoot them actively, routinely, systematically, to figure out, okay, what's gone wrong. So if there are fixes, we can figure out what that might look like. And so if you have someone who has those kinds of risks or dangers, not to wait until after the fact, that ideally, but to take those and say, okay, well, this is what we've got. What might be effective that any stakeholder in the system, whether it be law enforcement or the courts or someone else, might be able to work together to ensure the individual and the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just find in my work, sometimes there's a gap in knowledge of the therapist is not aware of how to work with the courts on getting something.
Sure, and that's where those advanced mental health directives could be helpful, because if you already have that relationship and that knowledge is being shared that you're working with that individual, if that person does happen to have some contact with law enforcement, then there would be a much more efficient mechanism for being able to assess what that risk is, which might not be possible if the person knows well enough to know the correct answers to give to someone in the court system to minimize the perceived risk.
Thank you.
So, hi there, Judge.
Yes.
Hi. So I'm a mental health advocate, and I come from family that has suffered from schizophrenia. And I myself have a history of having to deal with mental health discord. And my background is in pharmaceutical sales, selling antidepressant and antipsychotic medication. And I have a psychology background as well. So I pretty much, have been through the grips of this mental health for many years. And so something that's coming to me that I think is important is some sort of an integrative training for the jail systems, for the psych hospitals, and for the police stations. And that, like, an empathic training is really necessary, speaking as an advocate, in order to not only awaken the people to the symptoms that people are experiencing, but a gentler approach on how we're dealing with these individuals, because that will normally de-escalate any sort of, it could de-escalate a crisis from occurring in the approach style that we offer to the individual when they are experiencing, whether it is psychosis or a deep depression or a high level of anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar, any one of those things. When a person is approached in an empathic way or a compassionate way, and pardon me, I'm just a little bit nervous, so I'm just trying to speak off the cuff here. I wasn't planning on saying anything, but I do believe that training is very much necessary and needed, and that we should also incorporate alternative measures into the equation, because they could be proven to be very effective and helpful. So as pertains to the court, I think that that would be something to consider in investing our time and funds into, and also hearing the voices of the people that are afflicted, because they have a lot to say, and they do have insight to offer, so that we could all collaborate together. What are your thoughts about training?
Well, that's kind of what we're all working on, is to try to figure out how to do that, and also to be able to distinguish that which is intellectually driven, but that which is empathically driven as well. And I think that's absolutely essential, because I don't think, for especially if you haven't had that experience with either yourself or a family member or a friend of someone who's been in those crises or had those struggles, you don't know what it is that's effective, what is engaging, what is just alienating. We just do what we do because it sounds or seems or feels right to us, and to have a better appreciation and understanding as to what that impact is. There's a woman, Ellen Sachs, who runs the Center for Mental Health and the Law out of USC, who did an amazing TED Talk. So if you type in Ellen Sachs, S-A-K-S, and TED Talks, she herself suffers from schizophrenia and was able to go to law school, become a professor, and actually earned a Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation that she used to set up the Center on Mental Health and the Law at USC, that talks about her experiences with restraint. And even her psychiatrist was saying that was probably a good thing. And it clearly absolutely was. And she shares her own experience and her perceptions. And it was so incredibly powerful. I mean, it's probably been 8 years probably since I heard that TED Talk the first time, and it still so strongly resonates. But that's the message that needs to be conveyed. We need to hear what that really is like, because we think, oh, we're just keeping that person safe. That's the best thing for us to do, instead of causing incredible trauma to that individual.
That's right.
And we
That's,
don't, but we also need to know okay, well, if not that, then what? And so we need to hear both. One is what we're doing is actually causing harm, but we also need to know, okay, well, then what is it that we can or should do that's a better alternative?
Right, to have alternative options. I think you're spot on with everything you've said, and having options is so very important. And the truth is that there are many options, and for the people surrounding people who are afflicted, sometimes it's their eyes that need to be opened, and sometimes it's their minds and their hearts that need to be opened in order to connect, so that we can all somehow find common ground to speak a similar language of understanding one another. And that's the best way to be able to approach any growth within any person, whether it's the people surrounding the person or the person themselves. We're all growing and learning. So thank you so much for what you've said, and for giving me that contact to inquire about. Thank you.
Please, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Judge Shamus. We're a little bit over time here, so I want to be respectful of everybody. Really appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. We'll be reconvening next month, same time, same Zoom link. So please keep an eye out for emails coming through from Vincent for our upcoming criminal justice mental health intersect presentations. And thank you again for the great conversation. And Judge Shamus, we sincerely appreciate the terrific work that you're doing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great day.
Oh my God. Holy crap.